and inclusive practices. Today, Lucinda's talk has the intriguing title, Call It Out, the Power of the Bystander. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. You'll see up on the screen here, I've got a QR code, and I'm hoping you can hold your camera up and just scan it over the QR code. It will come up with a link, and you can just click on that link, and that's going to give you access to something called Mentimeter, which I'm going to use during my talk with you today. It's a great way to get participation, and I really enjoy hearing a bit from my audience as well as speaking as well. If anyone's having trouble at your table, maybe you can help them out if you've had some success. If the QR code's not working for you, you can instead go to your search engine and just put in menti.com. You can type that in. It will then prompt you to put in today's code, which is that series of numbers up on the screen. How are we going? Raise your hand if you've managed to get the green arrow on your screen. Oh, that's excellent. Very good success rate. Well done. I will put this up again if you are having any trouble. So, as you heard, my name's Lucinda Hewitson. I'm the CEO and founder of Diversity Inclusion. We work with organisations across Australia, supporting them to become more diverse and more inclusive. Call It Out, as the title suggests, is actually one of our services that we deliver. And I'm going to share a little bit about Call It Out. We deliver other services as well, but Call It Out is probably the most popular one that we deliver. We work with clients right across Australia. Some of them you're going to be very familiar with because they're based in South Australia, and we're based in South Australia. We've worked with, in terms of Call It Out, organisations here in South Australia include RAA, Cooper's Brewery, and BAE Systems have all adopted Call It Out over the past years. A little further afield, we also work with Tas Networks, who supply the electricity across all of Tasmania. And we also do work in the mining industry with Anglo American up in Queensland as well. Call It Out is very much about keeping our workplaces safe for everybody. And when I say safe, we're particularly talking not just about people's physical safety, but about their mental well-being as well. And so I'm going to get you to use your phone now. We're going to use Menti because I've got a question for you, and I'd love you to think about your experiences over your lifetime, perhaps in the workplace. But if you've had less experience in the workplace, maybe in other community settings, really any organisations that bring you into contact with other people. And I'd like you to think about the experiences that you've had of inappropriate behaviours like bullying, sexual harassment, or discrimination. So they're the joining instructions. If you need to scan the code again, it's up there. But it looks like most of you have had success getting on there, so let's jump into that. So my question for you is, have you been the witness or the target? And when I say target, another word for target could be victim of bullying, sexual harassment, or discrimination. And the wonderful thing about Menti is it's anonymous. And as you can see, as people are responding in real time, you can see their responses on the screen. So I'm going to give you a moment to respond and consider what your experiences have been over your lifetime of these inappropriate behaviours. And this is a question that we ask the people we work with when we're delivering our workshops, which we've now done with thousands of Australian workers. And so we've been collecting our own data on how people respond. And while the work we do is very much in the workplace, I just want to acknowledge that, of course, these behaviours, are not isolated to the workplace. Unfortunately, these behaviours happen in all kinds of social settings that we or our loved ones might participate in. So it looks like quite a few of you have had a chance to vote, and what we're seeing on the screen here is how you're responding to this question. And what we're seeing is many of you have selected both. At some point in your life, you've witnessed these behaviours, and at another time, you've maybe been the target. Some of you have just been a target. Some of you have just been a witness. A few of you have been lucky enough over life not to have experienced these behaviours. So what can we take from this? And what I can share is what we're seeing on the screen here for this group is the same as what we see across Australian workplaces. Unfortunately, these behaviours, bullying, harassment, discrimination, are common. Although we don't like to think that they happen in Australian workplaces and in our community, they actually are quite prevalent. The other thing that we can see here is many of you have been a bystander. You've been a witness to these behaviours. And we see the very same thing in our workplaces. In fact, the Australian Human Rights Commission a few years ago did a study on exactly this question. They asked thousands of Australian workers about their experiences of these behaviours. And what they found was that while 1 in 4 Australian workers, so 25%, have indeed been the victim of bullying, sexual harassment or discrimination, more than 50% of the Australian workforce have been the bystander to these behaviours. How prepared were you as a bystander to respond? Many of us reflect, I think, on these moments where we maybe saw an inappropriate behaviour, but we were really unsure as to what to do in this situation or what we might be able to say. Traditionally, training in our workplaces on this topic has tended to focus on two people. It's focused on the perpetrator and it's focused on the target and has completely ignored the role that each of us can play as the bystander. My business, Diversity Inclusion, has created Call It Out to do exactly that, to actually focus on arming every Australian worker with the tools and the approaches they can use should they be a bystander to one of these behaviours in the future. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your experiences. I wanted to share this quote because for me this really sums up the important role, the power of the bystander. This is a quote from Lieutenant General David Morrison in 2013 from the Australian Defence Force. And what he said was that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And I think this really resonates with so many of us. I think most of us would like to think if we saw an inappropriate or unlawful behaviour, if we saw someone being bullied or harassed, we'd like to think we would do the right thing, that we would speak up, that we would do something to stop the behaviour. Unfortunately, though, calling it out takes a great deal of courage. It's actually an incredibly difficult thing to do. I think we also sometimes tell ourselves that by doing nothing, we remain neutral. But unfortunately, what this quote reminds us is, in fact, that when we do nothing in these situations, people may assume, and usually assume, that we were okay with that behaviour, and worse, that perhaps we condone it. So there's great power in speaking up, in calling it out, if we are the bystander. But understandably, because we're human, we want to avoid conflict. It takes courage to call it out. When we call it out, we want to do it in such a way that we're not going to make the situation worse. But this, often in the heat of the moment, all seems too difficult and leads to us not taking action. So how do we call it out? And in a moment, I'm keen to share some of our tips that we've gathered over more than a decade of working in this space with you. But first, I want us to reflect on, why does it matter? You know, what are the negative consequences of things like bullying and harassment and discrimination in our workplaces, in our communities? Do they matter? Do they have consequences on the individual? So I'm going to get you to have a think about this now, and we'll use Menti again to see if we can, as a group, come up with a bit of a brainstorm on maybe what the negative consequences are of these behaviours. So what do you think the costs are to individuals that experience behaviours such as bullying, sexual harassment or discrimination? You'll see on your phones that I've progressed Menti along, and you should now have the opportunity to briefly type in a word or a short phrase to capture what you think the costs are. What are the negative consequences of these behaviours? You don't have to fill in all four before you click on submit. So we'll give you a moment to brainstorm and have a think about what are those negative consequences to individuals who experience things like bullying, harassment or discrimination. And you can see on the screens what you're creating is what's called a word cloud. So I'm going to give you a moment to type in. I know it's not always that easy typing into those tiny screens, but we'll give you a chance to do that. We can see some of your suggestions already are popping up on the screen. We can see many are focused on things to do with our mental health. We know trauma has a big impact on our mental health. You've captured depression, personality disorder, distress, anxiety, stress, but you're also capturing other impacts such as the impact on others. And here we know that can have a devastating impact on the relationship we have with others, perhaps family, friends, work colleagues. We may feel unsafe at work, and I think that's absolutely right, that these behaviours do make us feel less safe in the workplace. They make us also less productive as well. People who've experienced these behaviours are more likely to engage with perhaps unhealthy coping strategies as well, perhaps substance abuse. Indeed, some people have paid the greatest cost, with their lives. So the costs are enormous, and well done. You're doing a fantastic job of brainstorming together the very broad and deep costs and negative consequences that are associated with these unlawful behaviours on the individual. So well done. Just want to acknowledge that. I also want you to think about the individual. I imagine for most of you, when you were doing this brainstorm, you were thinking about the victims. It's really worth pointing out as well that many bystanders also are affected. So just when we witness these behaviours, we too can suffer some of these costs. It may surprise you also, and we know this firsthand because we've worked with perpetrators as well of these behaviours, that many perpetrators, when they're accused of these behaviours, also experience many of these costs as well. So the costs are enormous at the individual level, and it probably won't surprise you to learn that the costs at the organisational level are also huge. Bullying alone, when we think about it at the national level, has been found to cost the Australian economy each year more than $6 billion. And that's just bullying on its own. So the costs are huge when we think about these types of behaviours, not just at the individual level, also at the organisational level. Organisations that become known for these behaviours suffer huge reputational damage. Their ability to attract talent and, more importantly, retain talent becomes incredibly difficult. And as a result, they suffer financially. In the last few years, the federal government has strengthened legislation in this space. So it's no longer sufficient just to respond, for example, to a report of sexual harassment. Organisations across Australia now need to take action to actually prevent things like sexual harassment from occurring in the first place. Another thing that's worth considering is that it's really rare that somebody would wake up one morning after behaving in a very respectful and kind way and start bullying or harassing their colleagues. What tends to have happened is there's been a long history of what's maybe referred to as negative behaviours or incivilities, things like disrespect, rudeness, for example. And research has been done into these incivilities in the workplace and found that these are incredibly costly as well and can be very detrimental to an organisation's positive culture. So we often think about these negative behaviours, these incivilities, as the precursors, and we really encourage the people we work with to feel that they can call those things out as well, with the idea being that they can nip these things in the bud before they develop into something much more harmful, such as one of the unlawful behaviours. So I promised you that I'd share our top tips with you. So I'm going to do that now. When we're delivering our workshops with our clients, we have a lot more time and we're able to use some of the training resources that we've developed over many years. One of the things that we really enjoy sharing with them are our scenario videos. Each of these are based on a real life example, so a real case of bullying or harassment or discrimination that's actually occurred somewhere in our Australian workplaces. We use trained actors and each of these scenarios includes a bystander. We ask participants in our workshops to consider if they were the bystander, how would they call it out? One of the things that we've learnt working in this space for a long time is there's no one right way to call it out. If there was, I could have told you that right at the beginning. And so what we've learned is it's a very individual thing. What I might be prepared to say or do in a situation to call it out, it's probably going to be very different to you. And in some ways, we're all on a bit of a personal journey to figure out what would I be prepared to say or do. If I don't want to be that person that walks past something that's unacceptable, what is it that I would be prepared to say or do? Me and my team always say we're never going to tell people it's easy to do this. It takes huge courage to be that positive bystander, but there's great courage and power in being that bystander. I think one of the things that really helps us is to reflect on the target, and by no means are we suggesting that targets shouldn't speak up and shouldn't call it out, but we recognise that being the target and perhaps experiencing these costs puts you in the least powerful position to actually speak up about these things. And I think reminding ourselves of that when we're the bystander helps a little bit in terms of getting over some of those hurdles that sometimes get in the way of us doing the right thing. So I'm going to share my top tips before I close. So there's really 4 top tips that we share with people to support them to call it out. The first one is to focus on the behaviour rather than the individual. We know when we see these things unfold, and they often unfold very quickly in front of our eyes, that often the first thing that comes into our mind are labels. Perhaps somebody's just shared a sexist joke, so the label that pops into our mind is you're a sexist. Of course, when we use these labels, we're not setting ourselves up for success when it comes to calling it out. And I think if we're really honest with ourselves, we've probably all at some point in our lives engaged in some negative behaviours, some incivilities. Perhaps if we're really honest with ourselves, perhaps we've even engaged in things like bullying and harassment and discrimination. I think when we're really honest with ourselves, we would hate for people to believe that that one moment, that one behaviour, describes our whole being. And so when it comes to calling it out, focus on what you saw and heard. Focus on the behaviour. Our second tip can really assist with this too. Share how the behaviour made you feel. sometimes as a bystander, we do feel incredibly awkward in these situations. If we're seeing somebody is genuinely offended by something that's been said or done to them, we feel uncomfortable as well. And that can be an excellent cue to speak up. And it can be as simple as just saying, I felt uncomfortable when you shared that joke at lunch today. So you are always entitled to share how you felt in a situation, and this can help some people get over that hurdle, because sometimes that voice in our head that gets in the way of us speaking up is saying, well, was that person offended? I don't really know how they felt. But if you felt uncomfortable, that's the only cue you need to speak up. Our third tip, and probably the most important one, is to give the transgressor the benefit of the doubt. And some of you might be thinking, well, why would you give a bully or a harasser the benefit of the doubt? And that's because it's very rare that people are going out of their way to deliberately harm those around them. What's far more likely is that they're unaware of the negative impact that they're having on those around them. And so as a result, we should give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think when we approach with compassion, that they're not meaning to have this impact, that perhaps they're unaware of the offence that they're causing, we really set up the call it out for success. And then fourth and finally, my tip for you is to go easy on yourself. This is difficult. You don't have to deliver a lecture here. It's far better if you don't. In fact, the simpler, the better. So small and short phrases such as, I'm calling that out, are you okay, which you could say to the perpetrator, or I'm calling myself out, can be really effective. And over more than 10 years now of working in this space, I continue to hear from people participating in our workshops excellent suggestions on how to call it out. And often they are a word long. Sometimes they're just a question. Did I just hear that? Could you repeat that? These things can be very effective ways to call it out, and something that I think most people feel that they can engage in. And of course you can call yourself out. So I think we've all had that moment where a joke has maybe been taken a little too far. We realise we've said the wrong thing. You always have the prerogative to call yourself out. So as we approach a busy time of year, you mentioned the pageant and Christmas, our opportunity to socialise with people is wonderful, but it can create opportunities to speak up when we see other people might be offended by something that's been said. So I'd love you to think about what's a short word or a phrase that you could use if someone you cared about was offended in a situation that you'd be prepared to use. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucinda. That was very, very interesting. We do have time for questions, and so I'd like to take those questions from the floor if anyone has one at this stage.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very interesting presentation. Thank you. I'd like to ask what workers, what redress they have when they've taken all these steps. I'm thinking of a personal situation in a past working environment.
Yeah.
Where everybody has complained and the complaints get as far as middle management and that's it. And this person continues to bully people.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear this, and of course I think there were some noises around the room. People it resonates, and I think this is really difficult. I think when people do speak up, the research shows that calling it out is very effective and nipping it in the bud, but in rare cases, even when a perpetrator has been called out, they may continue. I think this is very difficult for employees in this situation. They're often not in a good position of power. My hope would be that members of HR or people in culture are taking responsibility to take a balanced view here and not just siding with managers or leaders in this situation. They can take it externally though, so the Australian Human Rights Commission will take complaints as well. That's often not something employees are told about, but that is absolutely a pathway that is available to all employees here in Australia. You're welcome.